Welcome to the Daily Bite with your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today we read from Ezekiel chapter 47. Then he brought me back to the door of the temple, and behold, water was issuing from below the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced east. The water was flowing down from below the south end of the threshold of the temple, south of the altar. Then he brought me out by way of the north gate, and led me around on the outside of the outer gate that faces toward the east. And behold, the water was trickling out on the south side. Going on eastward with a measuring line in his hand, the man measured 1,000 cubits, and then led me through the water, and it was ankle deep. Again he measured 1,000, and he led me through the water, and it was knee deep. Again he measured 1,000, and led me through the water, and it was waist deep. Again he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not pass through, for the water had risen. It was deep enough to swim in, a river that could not be passed through. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then he led me back to the bank of the river. As I went back, I saw on the bank of the river very many trees on the one side and on the other. And he said to me, This water flows toward the eastern region, and goes down into the Arabah, and enters the sea. When the water flows into the sea, the water will become fresh. And wherever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live, and there will be very many fish. For this water goes there, that the waters of the sea may become fresh. So everything will live where the river goes. Fishermen will stand beside the sea. From En-gedi to En-eglaim, it will be a place for the spreading of nets. Its fish will be of very many kinds, like the fish of the great sea. But its swamps and marshes will not become fresh. They are to be left for salt. And on the banks on both sides of the river there will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail, but they will bear fresh fruit every month, because the water for them flows from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for healing. Thus says the Lord Yahweh, This is the boundary by which you shall divide the land for inheritance among the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph shall have 2 portions, and you shall divide equally what I swore to give to your fathers. This land shall fall to you as your inheritance. This shall be the boundary of the land, on the north side from the great sea by way of Hethlon to Lebo-Hamath, and on to Zadad, Berothah, Sibraim, which lies on the border between Damascus and Hamath, as far as Hazer Hatakan, which is on the border of Hauran. So the boundary shall run from the sea to Hazar Anan, which is on the northern border of Damascus, with the border of Hamath to the north. This shall be the north side. On the east side the boundary shall run between Hauran and Damascus, along the Jordan between Gilead and the land of Israel, to the eastern sea, and as far as Tamar. This shall be the east side. On the south side it shall run from Tamar as far as the waters of Meribah Kadesh. From there, along the brook of Egypt to the great sea, this shall be the south side. On the west side the great sea shall be the boundary, to a point opposite Lebo-Hamath. This shall be the west side. So you shall divide this land among you according to the tribes of Israel. You shall allot it as an inheritance for yourselves and for the sojourners who reside among you, and have had children among you. They shall be to you as native-born children of Israel. With you they shall be allotted an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. In whatever tribe the sojourner resides, there you shall assign him his inheritance, declares the Lord Yahweh. This is the word of the Lord. This past week has been difficult to plow through Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48, and the whole time we've been looking at it how it was about Jesus. Jesus is this new temple being described. This is an eschatological, that is, end times kind of a conversation. And it really, if you've been struggling to see that, now we turn to chapter 47, verses 1 through 12, which paint a picture that is truly eschatological. This is paradise being described for us in our text today, and it's something Israel simply cannot do, to have a water flowing from the throne of God that will never stop, and when it empties out into the sea, it changes the sea. Israel cannot take the salt sea and turn it from a salt sea into a freshwater sea. They can't do that. The Israelites don't have that ability. But God can. God can restore the land, and He is going to restore the land on the last day, as he has promised elsewhere in Scripture. So this is where we're seeing the fruition of this. This is where that idea, what have we been reading this past week, really comes from. And so let's dig in again. Verse 1, the angel or Jesus, however you've been viewing the man from all the way back in chapter 40, verse 3, the man of bronze, he brings Ezekiel back to the temple to see. And this time, what is it that he's showing him? It's water. Water that flows from the temple towards the east. So again, remember, the temple is going to be roughly where Jerusalem is, and it's going to flow eastward from there. Now, the temple is the place of God's dwelling, where God is going to live in the midst of his people. Water is a gift that the Lord gives, and that's one where you can easily stop and ask your children, how does God use water to bless you? And yes, you can talk about daily stuff, like drink water for hydration and how that's good. You can talk about how you can use water to be made clean. But ultimately, you're pushing that to the idea of baptism, that in the waters of baptism, water combined with God's word has washed you clean of all your sin, and that the Lord has claimed you as his own. This connects very easily to the gospel account of John, where he records about Jesus, talking about living water, and how that living water that he gives to us will flow well up into an eternal water source for us. This water is the gift of God given to his people. This water is flowing out from his throne to us, and it will never stop. That's the beauty of this text, right? The water is just going. It starts as a trickle, and as you look at verses 3 through 6, it just grows. It becomes ankle deep, knee deep, waist deep, and then it's not even passable any longer. It is the gifts of God are abundantly poured out upon his people. The 1,000 cubit reference shows up there once. How many times? 2, 3, 4 times? So 4,000 cubits. Even just one of those would be twice the length of the temple complex itself. So we have 4,000 of those cubits based on the long cubit from probably earlier in the book, back in chapter 40. The cubits I'm not sure we really need to make a whole lot with, but instead, again, the idea that this is continuing. It just keeps going. It never stops. This is God providing for his people and his creation. Verse 6, the angel looks to, or Jesus looks to, I almost said John. He looks to Ezekiel, and he speaks and asks him the question, have you seen this? Have you seen the gifts of God given to his people? How great of a question that is. But it's very similar, and this is why I accidentally said John, very similar to what the angel in Revelation says to John as he questions him. Some certain parallels there. Now, one of the reasons perhaps Lutherans have often viewed this man of bronze as being Jesus rather than just any angel is the angel is leading Ezekiel through the water, right? Just as Jesus leads you through water for salvation. Perhaps that's connected. So the water only deepens and continues as it goes. And then Ezekiel sees the bank of the river, and it's filled with trees on both sides. And we're going to skip down. We'll come back to the sea here in just a little bit, but let's skip down to, I guess we'd be at verse 12. On the banks, both sides of the banks, all kinds of trees good for food are growing. See, this is the gospel remedy, right, to sterility and to death, as it gets phrased in the commentary by Horace Hummel on Ezekiel. You have this beautiful picture of a place that was barren, now bearing great fruit. And you can take this in two ways, right? The question you can ask your children here, in the New Testament, as Christians, we are described as trees, and we will bear what? See if they can fill that in. It's one that they should have heard a few times easily. We are to bear good fruit. And here we see these trees growing good fruit to be eaten. But it's not just the reference to us that we want to look at, because as it continues, their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail. You can look at Psalm 1, verse 3 for that. A very great picture and parallel to this text. But the other one we want to parallel to is all the way forward in Revelation chapter 22. So here in Ezekiel, we have the tree that will bear fresh fruit every month. Listen to Revelation 22. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life. See the connection already? Bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God. Connection again. And of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. Also on either side of the river, the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. See that picture? See all the connections between those verses and these? You've got the water of life, how it flows from the throne of God. How you've got the tree on both sides of the river. And that's singular in Revelation, which is interesting. The tree of life, just singular. But here it's, trees all over the place. The tree of life, Garden of Eden stuff, which is not a bad place to tie into here with Ezekiel 47 either, back to Genesis 1 and 2. That the leaves will be for healing. That's not to say that we are going to use plants for medicine. This is paradise again. This is the picture that God is restoring, even his creation for us. So lots here that you can pick up on. That's why I wanted to keep those together. So let's double back. The water flowing here goes into the sea. The sea by Araba would be the Salt Sea. So, by its very name, Salt Sea, or in the New Testament era, the Dead Sea. That should give you an indication of what's going on there. It's not habitable. Vegetation doesn't live there. Animals in the water don't survive there. So what's going to happen? Well, when this water of life that flows from the temple of God falls into that sea, it will be restored. It will be made fresh. It will be made new. God gives life to those that were once dead. This is a picture of the new heaven and the new earth. God taking a broken creation and restoring it, making it something new. And so wherever the river goes, the living creatures go. And there will be very many fish, the abundance of life that God will give. I don't know, this is prophecy, but if you want to talk about there being animals in paradise, this is probably one of the places you could turn to, right? As well as Peter's vision of the animals coming down on a blanket from heaven. Another possible spot to talk about. Genesis 1 and 2 would be another good one. The original perfect paradise had animals. Now, the reference to Engedi and Eneglaim, or Eneglaim, it's hard to pronounce that one in English. As you look at Engedi, that is still around today, and it's on the west side of the Dead Sea, roughly middle of the area there. It's actually a national park in Israel, but Eneglaim, not as well known. Very similar looking in Hebrew. Maybe that one's picked for that reason, but we just don't know exactly what that is. Now, the spreading of nets being mentioned is a reference to just the plentifulness of fish and the Lord's provision. We shouldn't take that as eating fish in paradise, as that would be death. There was no death pre-sin in the garden, so we can imagine there won't be death in paradise either. Now, verse 11, that the swamps and marshes will not become fresh, that could be an indication, a reference to us of the idea of God's judgment. And that even though we're hearing about the new heaven and the new earth, there will still be a place of judgment. There will still be a hell on that last day, where some will go. So the curse is turned to blessing. This is the section that really helps us to see it all the more clearly, what we've been talking about before. Just a few notes on the rest of the text, the dividing up of the land. The land was divided into 12 tribes. This is the original promised land that we're talking about. And so we're using that to foreshadow and talk about paradise. The Levites don't get a section of land. They were one of the 12 tribes. So instead, Joseph, his 2 descendants, his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, each get their own portion among the 12. Joseph being that favored son that he was. You shall divide equally what I swore to give to your father. So again, talking about that original promised land here. The boundaries, though, don't match the original promised land. So on the north side, the boundary is essentially connect from the Great Sea, which is the Mediterranean Sea. Your map today will have Damascus on it, or a good biblical map will have that too. So connect from the Great Sea to Damascus for the northern boundary. Then roughly you're going from Damascus down to really just trace your way down the Jordan River. All the way, it's hard to know exactly where Tamar would be, probably looking at what is on an Old Testament map, the land of Edom, somewhere in the northern part of Edom, south of the Salt Sea, as the eastern border. And then you're just connecting westward to connect over to the Mediterranean Sea again. The Brook of Egypt, so you're looking for a river that flows from the Salt Sea towards the Great Sea, towards the Mediterranean Sea. All right, so that's the boundary. The notable part of that is that the stretch of land that the Israelites possessed east of the Jordan River, when they were crossing into the promised land, of 2.5 of the tribes didn't want to continue on. They thought the land was already good enough, and they stayed. That land is not included. That was not part of God's promise. And so here God is returning them to his promise, and he is also going to return you to his promise, to a paradise that he is making for you and for me. That's John 14, right? Jesus saying that he has gone to prepare a place for us. Verse 22, this is a good one for anybody who's not Jew by birth. You shall allot it as an inheritance for yourselves, Jews, and for the sojourners who reside among you. A sojourner is a wanderer, someone who doesn't have a place necessarily to call home, but they're traveling. And so the sojourner among the Israelite was the Gentile. It was the outsider, the nations. So here you've got Jew and Gentile both coming to inhabit this new heaven and this new earth that the Lord has prepared. Christ's death on the cross is for all people. He rose from the dead that you might live, and that promise is not withheld from anyone. We rejoice. We rejoice that we get to see one another in paradise someday, even if we've never met here in this time. The Lord be with you, and we'll finish Ezekiel tomorrow.